Baby, you are so talented.
This podcast has stories of real-life events and true crime that happens every day. These stories may contain adult language and graphic or disturbing details not suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
132 in Bush, I've got him at gunpoint.
Check your left arm, we're going to full evacuation at this time.
They're pulling them out.
911, advise ready for camp.
Welcome to another episode of War Stories. I'm Tom, and today my guest and I are running solo. Matt was going to be our co-host this morning, but unfortunately, due to some unforeseen events with being a father, that's not going to happen. So you get myself and our guest, and today I'm excited to have our guest. Our guest is an author. He's a lecturer. He's a podcaster, and he's a consultant for police departments all over the country. Is that all over the world or all over the country, Jim?
I haven't been out of the U.S. yet, but I am willing to listen to offers.
That's right. You're taking offers. Please welcome our guest, Jim Dudley, columnist for PoliceOne magazine and criminal justice professor. Is it San Francisco State University?
Yep, that's right.
Very cool. We're happy to have you on. You just got back from Boston. We were talking about that before we started, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was there personally as a retired police officer, but also trying to get some interviews for my podcast, Policing Matters, the Policing Matters podcast.
And so how do people find that podcast? Where is it at?
It's everywhere. We're ubiquitous. We're on every podcast platform. If you go to Policing Matters on YouTube, you could see us on YouTube, me and my guest. Yeah.
All the places where you find podcasts, Spotify and all that stuff, Apple Podcasts. Good.
Yep.
And do you have a website they can visit? We'll redo it at the end, but we might as well since we're here.
Yeah, so you can find us on PoliceOne.com, and it's a Policing Matters archive of over 500 episodes, I believe. And we're on the Policing Matters YouTube channel, and I've got some unofficial, I was reminded by my editor, it is the unofficial Instagram account, Policing_Matters podcast,
right,
where I'll post a bunch of stuff.
Now, are you the official podcast of PoliceOne magazine?
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go. Okay. I remember when I became a cop, I obviously I had a bunch of books by Caliber Press, and then I got a subscription to PoliceOne magazine, and I'm old enough to remember when you actually received a copy every month in the mail.
Right.
So,
yeah.
We're glad to have you, and we'll just dive right in since it's just a little coffee for two at this point. We always like to get started with how our guests got into police work or got into service as a veteran or got into the military. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about your background and how your career brought you to where you are now?
Yeah, so growing up in San Francisco in the 60s, on the lower end of the economic scale, single mom, 6 kids, tough life in San Francisco without money. It's a great place if you've got money.
Oh, yeah, right.
So going to public schools, the usual rigmarole there, and crime was high. I mean, we talk about crime high in San Francisco now. It was nothing like the 60s, where we had street robberies and some gang life out there. Drugs were on the rise. In my career, I saw, the crack epidemic and all of that. That came later. But I had some interactions with San Francisco cops that were really enlightening to me, opened up the door to see what cops were really like, and not just from watching TV or seeing the newspapers. And, I'm just afraid that so many kids out there, that's all they know. TV, cops, stories, maybe, some negative influence. Of course, 2020, threw a really damp sleeping bag over law enforcement as a profession, as a noble profession. And so I really hope that kids get a chance to meet cops, and I hope cops realize the impact that they have on kids.
True.
And in those situations, I had a stolen bike and dealt with a cop one-on-one, treated me like a person, not as a little kid. And that really resonated with me. I had some other interactions growing up in the Mission District of San Francisco. Saw a suicide guy jump off a building, and the cops were just so great at taking care of all the bystanders, including the kids that were there. Some other interactions later on in my high school days that could have gone sideways, but the cops were very generous. So I saw it as something that I would want to do. It was also the time of the Zodiac, the zebra.
Did you know Dave Toschi?
Dave Toschi, famed San Francisco police inspector. I always wanted to be a police inspector. Zebra killings, Jim Jones mass suicide in Guyana started in San Francisco.
Their whole church was in San Francisco originally before they went to Guyana, right? And they still had people there. Well, the families were there, and
horrific times. So those were these volatile times. It was the 60s, and we had some big disturbances out in City Hall and such. So Harvey Milk, saw our mayor murdered.
Defense.
Our mayor was murdered along with one of the board of supervisors, Harvey Milk, and the really tumultuous time. So I saw it as a challenge and something I wanted to do. And 21 years old, there was a hiccup because I found out I was colorblind, and I was rejected.
Okay.
And I sat out there in the reject pile with another guy who said, "Hey, did you flunk the color test?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You can get a contact lens that'll fix that." Like, what? The guy's out of his mind. And sure enough, went to the optometrist, got one, took the test again, and passed. And the rest is history. I had just, I'm so grateful for the opportunities I had in law enforcement. My law enforcement career, just so rewarding.
Now, what year did you actually come on the job? Because you retired in 2013, right?
Yeah, 1980 was my first year with San Francisco Police Department. Yeah.
Wow. So you had a good run.
Yeah.
It's 20. That's what, 33 years?
Counting all my fingers and toes. Yeah, 32 years.
Oh, 32 years. And so you had hash marks up to your elbow.
Didn't do the hash mark thing.
SFPD doesn't do hash marks, huh?
They do, but I didn't.
Got it. Okay.
I think the first 5 years, guys are trying to, make their chops. And hey, I've been around a while, but I mean, it really does get kind of ridiculous after a while.
You're like, at some point, you're like, I'm tired of sewing these on there. I'm just going to quit. So, I mean, that was, law enforcement, because I came on in the early 2000s, about 2002, I went to the academy. And so obviously, but I'm a legacy hire in a certain sense. My dad worked for LAPD. So there was that friendly rivalry, LAPD, San Francisco PD, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
But yet at the same time, when I came on the job, my old man said, "Okay, cool. Just don't go to LAPD." And I had grown up kind of idolizing Adam 12 and LAPD and all that kind of stuff. And people who listen to the show know I was, like, why? And he said, it's not the same agency anymore. So let me ask you, from the time you came on in 1980 to the time you retired in 2013, that's a lot of change in the law enforcement culture.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. I mean, there are probably guys that looked at your early policing methods from when you came on the job to when you finished, and they thought you were a dinosaur. But but I'm sure you also had cops. Like, I was the kind of guy who said, man, I wish we could go back to those days. Simpler times, So you saw it really change. I think probably one of the biggest shifts, because law enforcement goes through cycles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we saw some of those cycles shift from the 50s to the 60s, right? Tactics that were, that were being used in the 50s and 60s were by the time the 70s and 80s rolled around, it was considered, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And then even then, stuff they developed in the 80s and 90s, by the time the 2000s rolled around, it's, oh no, you can't do that. So you really saw a big shift. What would you say was the biggest shift you had seen over your career?
Well, it's funny how you frame all this because when I came in 1980, we still had that Vietnam era of cops,
Right,
and
guys that
and
had come back from Vietnam.
yeah, and a lot of those guys were bemoaning the fact that freaking Miranda was a big issue, and I'm like, Miranda, holy shit, that was like 15 years ago
Right.
at the time, and so the cops don't like two things, right? They don't like things the way they are, and they don't like change.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
so that's I was dealing with that throughout my career. I was sort of torn between two eras. I'm a boomer, right? And so all the changes that happened, I kind of embraced because I saw the opportunity to get better. I saw the training was getting better. We were having more access to legal issues and learning about things. I mean, we went from that Batman era, Batman driving around in dark cars, stopping, grabbing people, cuffing them, throwing them in the car, driving off, right? And the public's like, what happened? And what would they arrest that guy for? Now, cops are under such scrutiny. I'm not appreciative of that, rather than help a cop these days, people are more likely to pull out their phones and start
Right.
recording,
Right.
hoping they'll catch something awful.
Yeah.
But uh,
The
I
Rodney
mean,
King effect.
yeah, so I've seen those things, right? So I've seen that sort of degrading, eroding relationship between the community and the police. And I mean, like I said, growing up in the 60s and seeing, the civil rights era and the protests and the riots and San Francisco State. I mean, you had cops, dragging students out of San Francisco State for protests. And then that sort of middle 70s era where we did have those real threats. And so
Right.
the community endeared themselves with police again, saying we need cops,
Yeah,
right? And it's
Zodiac has that effect on people.
right. And the zebra, I don't think a lot of people know about the zebra killings, but it was Black Muslims driving around looking for white people to kill.
Right.
And they were putting the fear of God into people not wanting to go out at night. And so
Right.
the police again were seen as, a protector, a guardian. So those were good times as far as, community policing relationships. And then, as the time went on, we'd see things like Rodney King, um, and the media exposure, and then people putting their stamp on why we should hate the police again.
Right.
That became fashionable in my time period. I think the real changes for me though came from the real threats that we saw on the street. We
Mhm.
saw, LA, you guys saw those guys in the fully armored
Yeah, North
Kevlar,
Hollywood bank robbery.
fully automatic machine guns, like, out of a movie. And we had something similar in San Francisco, fully outfitted armored guy with a machine gun, shot and killed James Gelf, one of my colleagues at Northern Station. And one of the issues was Jim Gelf had a six shooter. He had a revolver, and
Right.
it was, I don't know, maybe a month after that shooting that our agency finally said, "Hey, you guys can choose your own semi-automatics, go out and buy them at your own expense." I bought a Glock immediately because Glocks were big at the time.
Sure.
And then we eventually went to a Beretta, and I think we're at a SIG right now. And so the evolution of better firepower, we went to patrol rifles, we had access to armored vehicles, not tanks, as we've been criticized for, but all of those innovations, the body armor got better, officer safety got better. We got some more tools for defensive tactics, weapons, things like that. But ironically, San Francisco PD, here in the hub of technology, right above Silicon Valley, never had tasers. Never, still
Really?
to this day, never had a taser. And
Now,
so,
is that a what do you attribute that to? Because you would think that less lethal platform would be something that they would adopt pretty early.
you'd think. Well, I credit San Francisco cops for working in an environment that's already tough. Policing
Mhm.
is a tough job.
Right.
I totally see it as a noble profession. Unlike your dad, I said it was fine for my two sons to go into the SFPD, where they're both sergeants now. One's a sergeant at a really busy station, and the other is a sergeant in the gang task force. And I'm really proud of them both. And I still see policing as a noble profession. I've been called a law enforcement evangelist because I teach criminal justice now. I encourage my students to look into the profession. It's not for everybody, but I
No.
encourage anybody who's looking for mentorship. I'm happy to do that, give career advice and all of that. But um, yeah, I think the idea of my sons in policing San Francisco, it's great. But I know the limitations. I know the restrictions of our very liberal elected officials, our mayor, our board of supervisors. Um, and a lot of the constraints, like not allowing the use of tasers. Well, not only that, but we lost the ability to use the carotid restraint, which
Right.
was a really valuable tool. And so I think it's so short-sighted for the elected officials to say, we're going to limit your use of force options. And they don't realize that they're just shortening that span between hands and the firearm.
Right.
And so then the cops are criticized for use of force when they are using a baton or they're using a firearm in situations where maybe a taser could have prevented it. But that specter of being abused on certain segments of the population, that's always been used by the liberal police commission or other oversight people who say that we've seen people killed by tasers, when in fact the limited use of a taser in situations may have contributed to already pre-existing medical
Sure.
conditions, mental health issues, enlarged hearts. They told us not to use excited
Right.
delirium anymore, but
Uh,
all those
But
things.
that's the thing, that we've gotten away from a society that says, look, if the cops have to come and get you, you've usually done something to bring them to your door. We don't randomly go out and pick people to harass, right? At,
100%.
at least 99% of the cops don't, because we all know there's bad actors out there in any profession, right? There's crappy lawyers that cause all the lawyer jokes. There's crappy doctors that cause all the doctor jokes, right? In any profession, you have terrible people. But I would say that for the most part, by and large, 99.9% of the cops are out to do the right thing. And that's one of the reasons why I've always said that the people that hate bad cops more than anyone else are good cops, right? Because they make our jobs harder. And we talked about Rodney King, right? We mentioned the videotape effect. Well, if you go back and you look at what the LAPD's internal findings were, and I know this because my dad was on the internal review board, it was a training issue. They had taken away so many options from these officers and not trained them how to deal with somebody that was resisting in that manner and that they could not overcome, that the only thing they taught them was nightstick. And so they reverted to their lowest level of training, which is, what you saw. And if you take away, I was able to get the carotid restraint put into the top of hands-on as the use of force instructor in my department. And I will tell you that we see it all the time in MMA. We see it every day on the internet. Brazilian jiu-jitsu people know it is a very effective and most of the time safe method, as long as you have somebody who's properly trained and it's properly applied. But we've gotten away from the fact that if I apply it to somebody and bad things happen because of their pre-existing issues, it's not me, it's them. It's their response. The onus is on them. So then when bad cops go out and do bad police work, ooh, and then you touched on something that I think is one of my key points. This job is not for everybody. And just because you think it's cool and just because you want to do it doesn't mean the profession needs you, right? That was why the screening process existed in the way it did, right? You may have desperately wanted to be a police officer, but police departments needed to determine if you were the right person to be a police officer based on what the job was. And what I see is those standards have been altered, changed, and bastardized to make police work more inclusive, and instead screening out people that are going to freak out and pull their gun when they shouldn't, that aren't going to be able to go hands-on, that are afraid to get in a fight, that are afraid to try and work just, or that don't have the personality to let insults and high pressure situations roll off their back and maintain their calm under pressure. And all of those factors contribute to these uses of force that people go, well, why did they do that? And I go, because they weren't ready for police work. You know, I mean, what say you? Do you see the standards nowadays being a problem for cops who maybe shouldn't, like, they get into the job and then you kind of look back and go, ooh, maybe this wasn't for you, buddy?
Yeah, I mean, I was an FTO, a field train officer, for 5 or 6 years at my station, and saw a lot of recruits. And I saw that sometimes immediately. I remember rolling around on the ground, fighting with a guy with a knife, and my recruit watching it like she was watching TV. And I said, "Hey, get down here and help."
Yeah.
And she was frozen. And I said, "Well, call for help." Right. So she got on the radio, but didn't realize where we were. So I said, "Just bring the mic down to me." And I put out our position. That was that was an instant decision right then and there, when I went back to the FTO office and said, "I'm not getting back in the car with that person."
Yeah.
I think our screening methods are still good. I think are still the psychological testing. We don't get everybody clearly, right?
Sure.
We don't catch everyone. I think the process is still pretty good.
But we used to have a layer of the stress academy that would kind of help to cause people to self-identify. And I feel like we had these layers in place, and it isn't one change. It's the watering down of almost every layer.
Yeah, but we've seen the over aggressive cop get into those situations as well, right?
True.
So I tell my students, look, when you go for the testing, they don't expect you to be a cop right off the bat, but they
Right.
want you to engage. They want you to use problem solving and decision making. And
Right.
I think the test gets that low end, apathetic. Why are they even here? They're not going to do anything, right? They give you a scenario, the scenario changes, and you still don't change to the point where you're going to arrest the guy. That person's out. The other end of the spectrum is,
The badge heavy. Yeah.
you're going to the scene and you're going to talk to a reportee who wants to make a complaint about blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, "I'm an arrester." No,
Right.
wait, hold on
Yeah.
a second. So there's those two ends of the dichotomy, the overdoer and the underdoer. And we're looking for that sort of middle
Right.
ground
Neither one
person.
belong in the profession.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the process is still good. Ironically, I just released a book with my co-author, Janae Gasparini, a PhD cop in New York. She heads an academy there. And we wrote a book about recruiting and training Generation Z law enforcement officers.
Ooh,
And I
that's
think,
very interesting.
yeah, and I think one of the issues is I feel like today's 21 is our era's 18. And
Yeah.
I think, we've made so many concessions for kids growing up. And I think 2020, we're still not realizing the impact of 2020 on
Oh,
us.
no.
And so this last batch of recruits, I think we're still getting good people, but I think we're still getting people that are like, we're still trying to socialize. We're still trying to,
Yeah.
you remember going into somebody's house as a 21-year-old and telling a 45-year-old man to sit down on his own couch in his
Yeah.
living room
Right.
because he's fighting with his wife or his girlfriend. I mean,
Command presence.
yeah. And so I think we're having today's recruits sometimes having a difficult time with that.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I think I don't think
The
the
perfect
process.
storm.
Yeah, I don't think the process has changed as much as the candidate has.
Mm,
And
interesting.
and so I think the burden is on the trainers at the academy and the field training officers to try to produce the best product that they can. And I think we do need to adapt. I think we need to maybe unplug some people at some points in training, give them more intensive training, get them back up, and then put them back in the game. And I think in FTO, if we have a 16-week field training program, why can't we just extend it? I mean, we're investing so much money in the process with these people. Why can't we give them a little more time and cultivate them to being what we really want rather than either push them through or show them the door? And
Well, and I'll say I've seen agencies that have almost the opposite, right? There are some agencies that have like an FTO program that's basically as long as you're on probation, you're a trainee,
okay.
and they will cycle people through ad nauseum. So I think again, it's that spectrum, right? It's always that balance because there are people that maybe should be given a little bit more time to adjust, and then there are people that are probably given too much time. And I think that's where and you added training academy trainers and FTOs. I will add administrators. Pick your FTOs properly and then listen to them. Right? They know, right?
Mhm.
They work with this person. If the FTO says he just needs a little extra time, he just needs a little tinkering, he just needs a little more training, he's probably right. And if the FTO says this ain't the guy, you need to flush him, then you should probably flush him.
Yeah,
And
but to your point about the probationer still being considered a trainer, you know as well as I, if they're not getting paid, what kind of training are they getting?
yeah,
And so I'm going to throw you, a brand new recruit who's just finished FTO, in a probation period with the guy nobody wants to work with,
oh no, yeah.
and you're going to ride with them, and you're still on probation getting trained, and you're really not. So
Well, no, but that's on the agency, right? If
yeah,
you got a probationer, you need to put them with strong people. Our agency would specifically people be like, well, why do I get this shift? And the trainee gets the other shift. I wanted that shift. And if the lieutenant was, good, he'd pull the salty cop aside and go, he needs it. You don't,
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
it was whether it was the cops that were on that shift, because we worked in squads, right? So if he knew that squad was strong and was going to be able to bring this kid along, then they'd put the kid with that squad. If they knew the kid needed some calming, maybe they put him on day watch. Maybe if their paperwork needed some work, maybe they put him on day watch because taking paper constantly on day watch was going to help them. So there was a lot of that, after training when you're on probation, you gotta look at somebody's strengths and weaknesses, and your admin really has to do their job, and your watch commanders really have to do their job to put them where they need to be on the road. And the salty guys need to understand, don't just take your probationary guys and stick them on graveyard shift with some lop. So anyway, my 2 cents. So let's talk about some of your stories because I could talk about the hierarchical corporate problems in law enforcement for forever and a day because I've seen all aspects of it. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. But let's talk about your story. Let's talk about some of the things that you experienced when you were on the street.
Yeah, well, I was my first 10 years in patrol, pushing a black and white, going to call to call to call. No shortage, like I said, in the 80s, epidemic hit. Saw a lot of violence. When I talk to my students now and we talk about crime statistics, the 90s was the high water mark of crime in
Yeah.
America.
Yeah.
And
Gang
so leading
warfare, drug war. Yeah.
Oh, we had red light robbers that we have a lot of hills in San Francisco. If you come to a red light on a hill, we had gangs of kids opening your car door, grabbing you, pulling you out of the car, taking your purse off, your briefcase, whatever off the seat, robbing you, broad daylight, midnight, any time of day. Tourists coming to San Francisco were given these awful maps, and being robbed in these awful neighborhoods they should have never been in, but somebody at the Chamber of Commerce thought it was a good idea to show them a shortcut from City Hall to one of, Golden Gate Park or, the Transamerica building or something like that. And they're like,
So what
here,
you're
go
saying
through.
is the Chamber of Commerce was on the gang payroll.
Yeah. Go through this gauntlet to get to where you're trying to get. Hopefully you
Right.
have a camera to take a picture by the time you get there.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, what I see different today is we were taking the shotgun out on a lot of calls.
Yeah.
We had real bank robberies back then. We had shootings. We had, crime scenes that were, like today's crime shows or true crime shows. And, I had a couple of situations. I talk about use of force in my class, and we talk about all the force options from verbal commands to hands-on to chemical and baton and all that. But I mean, we know that the transition from getting there and saying word one, and the next thing you know, you're hitting a guy with your gun, right? So,
Right.
because that's all you have at that point. And a couple of those situations, I remember this one going to call in the Tenderloin, the low, awful part of the district where we got a
I'm
call,
familiar.
woman screaming from a car, get there. It's, I don't know, midnight, and there's a car parked in the parking lot, doors open, and yeah, sure enough, this woman's screaming. It's not really a woman, but this woman screaming, and gets out, and somebody I recognize, a frequent prostitute who we're calling sex workers now, comes out of the car, and as she walks by me, says, he's got a gun. And so I said, okay, he's got a gun. So I show it to my partner, a guy that I don't work with regularly, that he's got a gun. We've got the standoff. We're doing de-escalation, even back in the 80s, telling the guy, put your hands up, put your hands up. He's under the influence of something at this point,
Right.
not going with the program. And so my partner pulls out the shotgun, and he's got it trained on this guy. And I don't know, we're there for 10 minutes or so, put it on the radio. It's nobody's coming. So I tell my partner, not the best idea, I think about in retrospect, but I tell my partner, don't shoot. I'm going to the car. I'm going to smash his window. When he looks up, you go in, grab the gun. We'll pull him out from both sides of the car.
Right.
It's a dumb idea. I go up, get some
So many
leverage.
good stories are born by those ideas.
Oh my God. I go to get leverage and pull the handle up. So I have my pistol, my 6-shooter out, and I go to get leverage to pull and hit the window at the same time. And I pull, and the door's unlocked. The door opens, and now he looks up at me. I look at him, and he goes for the gun. And like I said, all I had was my gun. Bang across the bridge of his nose, and pull him out. My partner dives in, pulls the gun, got him on the ground, handcuff him. And at that point, I'm thinking, holy smokes, I guess my other option was to shoot him, but I didn't. And
Right.
so my sergeant says, hey, it's clean. That's all you could do at that point. The only other thing you do is wrestle with this guy over a gun. And
Right.
when we talk about dedicating the show, I want to dedicate it to a sergeant that I worked for who was just ex-Marine, spit shined, the best model that you could ask for as far as modeling behavior of a cop. And he was killed in a situation like that where he was wrestling with a guy at a car stop who had a gun, and a couple of officers pull up on the scene, and he's yelling, shoot him, shoot him, shoot him. Well, at that point, the guy squeezes one off and shoots, Sergeant McCauley. And, in those situations, you do the best you have with what you have. And at that point, that's all I could think of. And I don't know if I saved my life. I think I definitely saved his life, because if he would have had the gun in his hand, that would have been that.
Well, and so we see that a lot, right? And so it's interesting that you bring that up, because we were just talking about mindset of the modern police officer and all this stuff, and we see body cam videos consistently of cops walking up on car stops, seeing a gun, and oftentimes, they screw their gun into the guy's ear and say, "Don't move, don't reach for it," and you can hear the panic in their voice. You can hear the tension. Right? It's a scary moment, right?
Mhm.
Regardless, I'm sure it was a scary one for you. I've experienced stuff like that. It is scary, right? But it's what you can do with the fear and what you can do, where your mind's at and how you compose yourself in that moment, right? And that's why Monday morning quarterbacking is so awful sometimes. But then you see them screw their gun in the guy's ear, and then they twitch or they go for it or whatever, and then they get lit up. And you had every opportunity to have that be how your scenario went down, right?
Mhm.
So what was different about your mindset then? And do you look back and think you would make a different decision now?
Yeah, every guy I ever worked with, and I had regular partners, we'd drive around and pitch scenarios to each other, and
Yes.
I had the mindset early on in my career that if I had to shoot somebody, I was going to.
Right.
And I think today's recruits, sometimes if you ask them in these situations, are you willing to take somebody's life? Are you willing to shoot somebody? And if they're at all questioning at that point, you have to wonder, like,
Why
holy
are you
smokes,
here?
or what are you gonna do when the time comes? You
Right.
won't have that opportunity to stop and think about it. So, like I said, I mean, and maybe it was from watching movies. Like, one of the movies that I saw early on was The Onion Field,
Oh God.
and the Bakersfield, the
Yep.
cop who was killed.
Carl Hettinger and Ian Campbell.
Right, exactly. And we talked about it, about if anybody ever gets the drop on me and they've got me at gunpoint, shoot them. Do
Right.
do not surrender your weapon. Don't
Right.
We don't negotiate with terrorists, and anybody who's got me at gunpoint, light them up. Uh, and we've always had those conversations about what we would do. And I don't know, I'm hoping that FTOs are talking about this with their new recruits. Like it's having situational awareness. It's going to a movie theater and saying, if a guy walked in with a Batman costume and a machine gun, where am I
Right.
going? Right? Because
Right.
that's happened.
Yeah.
And same with any public place you go into. If there's a terrorist event, if there's an active shooter, I'm not saying be paranoid, but I'm saying always have a plan, at the very least, an exit strategy.
Yeah.
And in policing, you've got to have that mindset that at the point of engagement, you've got to react, and you should have a good idea of how you're going to react.
I think of the RoboCop Terminator, when you'd always see from the POV of the Terminator or RoboCop, and they scanned and everything in the room, maybe it wasn't in the center of their frame of vision, but it had a square and then it was categorized and there was some readout on the screen and then it was stored in the memory banks. And that's kind of how I think of like constantly scanning. My dad used to say, "Head on a swivel, kid." Right. And when I was growing up, I'd watch my dad drive and he'd be, listeners can't see, but he'd be looking left and looking right. And he rarely looked at the road. And this was in his, our family truckster.
Yeah.
And I remember my stepmother at the time was asking him, "Why you're not looking at the road?" And he go, I can see the road when I scan, right? I'm looking for other things. And I that made a big impression on me. And one of the things that you talked about, he the day I went, like we had a big family dinner the Friday night, then I had the weekend off and I started the academy on Monday. And at that dinner, my dad looked at me square across the table, and I think I've told the story before. And he looks at me and said, "Son, do you think you can shoot somebody?" And I said, "What?" And he goes, "I'm going to ask you this, and you need to answer me. Do you think you can shoot somebody?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And I said, "Why do you ask?" And he goes, "Well, because if you haven't thought about it before, now's the time." And I said, "Well, no, I think I can." And he goes, "How do you know?" And I said, well, because if it's them or me, it's them. And I guess it's never really been an issue. Like it's just you've had, and so I guess growing up, I had a different mindset that I was blessed with as a cops kid, and maybe your kids can say the same thing. But I think there are a lot of people that go into the law enforcement profession that have never asked themselves that question, or nobody's ever asked it of them.
Mhm.
And the other thing is, I went to an I'm Shot class with Larry Blum and a bunch of cops that were telling their stories. You know who I'm talking about. And
Yes.
one of the cops said, I was in 3,000 shootings, and the first 2,999 of them were in my head. And what you're talking about, my dad used to say the same thing. He goes, talk to your partners over breakfast, in the car, over coffee, when you're grabbing a soda, when you're meeting up after a call. Talk about, calls that go right. You're like, oh yeah, we talked that guy into cuffs and it went fine. But then ask him, hey, what would you have done if he did this? What would I have done? What if things, like, hash
Mhm.
that out, because that is, and I liken it to athletes, right? Athletes a professional golfer pre-visualizes his swing. Basketball players pre-visualize those free throws. Baseball players pre-visualize the grand slam swing. If you don't pre-visualize as a cop, you're doing yourself a disservice. You need to prepare mentally.
100%.
Yeah. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I did that with my recruits driving along, called it narrative driving. What do you see? Don't have to take action. Just tell me what you see. There's a guy drinking a can of beer in the corner. There's a car parked at a hydrant. There's guy Jay walking over there. Gets them into that mindset of scanning, just what you talked about. And so that's we should be doing that.
Right.
And otherwise, but again, going to today's generation of a lot of kids aren't driving.
Yeah.
So they get their license to take the test and they are, white knuckling, eyes straight ahead on the road because they're so not used to driving.
Oh yeah.
Where
My
I was
generation, I stole my sister's car when I had my learner's permit.
right. I was just going to say, we're driving at 15 and a half
Yeah.
and probably, doing some other stuff while we're driving. So
Right.
I think the generation effect, it has something to do with that. But totally with you on that, visualizing it, not to the point of obsession, but to have that in your head. This is what we got to do when it happens.
Right.
And it worked for promotionals too. I mean, we would talk about the sergeant's test. And then when I was an inspector sergeant at their desk or driving around, we would talk about the lieutenant's test and, get form groups. And I think if you're doing the job the right way, you don't have to cram for those tests because you've been doing them the right way.
Right.
If you're a cut the corner guy all the time, you don't really do it that way. I used to try to get somebody from investigations, somebody from TAC, somebody from different patrol stations, and we talk about things. And I'd have the patrol guy always saying, "Oh no, we don't really do it that way." And I'm saying, "No, but this is the way the test is designed. So let's learn it this way." And so
Right.
it works at every level of policing that you got to talk it out. You got to pre-visualize it. You just reminded me I need to visualize my golf shot more because apparently I'm not doing it.
You're not pre-visualizing.
No, seeing the after effect, not good.
Now, coming through the 80s, you must have seen some pretty hairy stuff and been involved. I mean, it was the Wild Wild West, right? Like the 70s and 80s were the Wild Wild West of police work. You mentioned tanks, and I think that's LAPD's fault, right? During the crack epidemic and the Crips and Bloods epidemic, Daryl Gates, the chief of LAPD, they had an armored personnel carrier, and they put a battering ram on it. And he said if they, because they couldn't get through those drug dealer, they had cages basically built into the front doors of their houses.
Yeah.
And so he said, screw it, go through the side of the house, right? And so they would knock down a wall with their APC to make entry safely for those police officers. I mean, that like unheard of now. And I think, like I said, it was the Wild Wild West. So you came up during that era. You must have seen and been on some pretty crazy calls that modern cops can't quite fathom.
Yeah, I mean, we had a McDonald's takeover, a bunch of guys in mass take over with guns, get the call, get there, lock it down, call the employees, they come out and they're like, they're gone. And so We do a search, go up to the roof. There's a guy on the roof with a gun, grab him. Everything's done. And we start looking at license plates in the parking lot. And I go up and I put my hand on this big Ryder rental truck and I could feel movement inside. So we end up surrounding it, announcing, pulling up the door, and there's the other couple of guys inside, still armed. And I'm just wondering if we would have ever drove past that or left them there, right? That
Right.
hide in plain sight. But I mean, the Wild West that you describe, in one particular case. So we had a routine of sorts. I mean, you should never get complacent or routine, but we would go through who's wanted in the district, go through the roll call sheets, pull out a hot sheet, pin it to the dashboard, get all the photos of the usual suspects, stick them in your pocket, and go out. And you had to know your sector, right?
Right.
And I remember driving up Polk Street in the middle of town in our district, and we had just taken a burglary report. My partner was passenger, I was driver. And driving, you talk about that ability to scan and see. And I'm driving northbound, and I see coming southbound in another car in the passenger seat one of the guys we're looking for, a guy whose picture I have in my pocket. And I tell my partner, "There's the guy," and I say his name. And my partner's like, "Oh shit," right? And pull out the picture, show him. And now I go Papa U, come back up behind these guys. There's a couple cars between us. And he goes to light them up. And I said, "Well, let's wait till we didn't want a car chase. Let's wait till they get stuck in traffic." Driving south on Polk Street now, and we're coming up upon a bunch of bars, and they had those big open window doors that went from the sidewalk to inside. And just as we start pulling up to a red light where they're going to get boxed in, now I'm right behind them, and the guy's looking over the seat, making eye contact. And I say, "Okay, here we go." My partner grabs the mic to put it out. Well, too late. The guy jumps out of the car, runs through the window, and now he's in this bar.
Oh, geez.
Sunday afternoon, 4 p.m., bright sunlight. And I put it out, 1030 vehicles, felony stop at this location. And now I'm like, do I stay with the car and the driver, probably stolen car, or I go with my partner chasing this guy? I know the guy's wanted, know he's been armed before. Let the car go to the door, try to get my eyes adjusted from light to dark. And I see my partner chasing this guy around the back of the bar. It's a gay cowboy bar, peanut shells and sawdust all over the ground. And they're slipping and sliding, and they both take a flying slide into tables and chairs, and they're intertwined. Well, the guy pops up and starts heading towards the door. I grab him at the door, like literally running back into a linebacker, and we go ass over tea kettle out the front door into newspaper racks. This is how long ago it was. And the newspaper racks on the street, and the fight is on. And I'm trying to get him into the carotid. We're both on the ground. He's coming up. I pull him, but his jacket comes off. And I finally get up and I get my arm around his neck. I have his chin in the center of my elbow, and I've got my bicep and my forearm, and I'm just starting
position. Yeah.
I'm getting ready to crank down because it's so effective, right? Give me 15 seconds. He's done. We put the handcuffs on, go home. And unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. I get him in that position. I start to crank down, and I hear a gun go off, and I go, those famous two words, "Oh shit, he's got my gun," I'm thinking. And I'm just holding on. Now I got Tiger by the tail, and I take a peek down to look and see that he's got my gun out of my holster, but I still have my gun in my holster. So then I reached back and noticed that he's taken a gun out of his back pocket. He had it in his back pocket, and the front side of the gun caught up on the corner of his pant pocket. And essentially, that's where the gun went off. Round goes between my legs somewhere down Polk Street. Take a big
Holy
gulp,
shit.
drop down onto my knees, and now I've got him in the crook of my arm. The carotid that ship has sailed, and now
Right.
I'm trying to hold him by that right arm, still holding onto the gun. And at this point, my partner comes flying out of the bar, slides up between his outstretched legs, grabs him by both wrists as I'm losing control. And now we've got the tiger by the tail, and he's pulling the gun up to my partner's face. And at that point, I don't know if I was consciously thinking about it, but all I could think of was Sergeant John McCauley getting shot
Right.
in the head by a guy with a gun in this struggle. And it is literally a life and death struggle. And at that point, I made the decision, I'm going to shoot this guy. And I pop up, push, slam him down, and shot in one motion. And honestly, we go back to our muscle memory
Right.
and all of those things we talk about in shootings, the tunnel vision, the enhanced smell, sight, sound. I could hear the gunshot ringing,
Everything slows down.
smell the gunpowder, see this guy looking up at me. And I remember him mouthing the words like, "You shot me," like incredulously, "You shot me." And I'm like, "Hell yes, you were trying to shoot me."
Yeah.
Right. And I holster my pistol, reach down, grab his, tuck it in my shirt like we were taught, I'll pop a button, stick that gun in there so it's
Yeah.
out of the way. And then it was a little bit blurry at that point, right? So we call for an ambulance. I mean, nobody had to train us to say you call for aid after that, right? The guy,
Right.
I just shot the guy. Call for an ambulance, 408 code 3, ask for a supervisor. Already there's I could hear sirens coming, backups
Right.
coming.
Right. People are calling, you called for backup. Patrons at the bar are calling, like they're getting reports from everywhere, I'm sure.
Right. So that was the aftermath, right? The ambulance comes, takes control of him, talk briefly to my partner. Are you okay? Are you shot? Are you hurt? We were both nicked up from, the fight and the wrestling around and all that. But they separate us, take us back to the station. My watch commander interviews me. It's kind of dumb story, but he was a sergeant as the acting lieutenant, brings me in, asks me what happened. I go into detail, everything that happened. He says, "Okay, go hang out there." A minute later, he calls me back. I see him on the phone. He calls me back in. I come in and he sits me down. He pulls out his Miranda card and starts reading me Miranda. And I'm like, holy smokes, what the heck?
Yeah.
And he says, "Did everything you say before still apply now?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He says, "Okay, get out of here." And all I could think of was somebody, he called to say, "Oh God, I just had a guy involved in a shooting, am I doing the right thing?" And they probably said, "Well, did you give him his rights?" And I'm sure they meant Liebarger or my administrative rights. But instead, the guy pulls out his Miranda card like I'm going to jail. So you could, you could say that I was a little heightened from that as well. Went in, called my wife. I had a 6-month-old and a 1-year-old at home. And all I could think about was them at that point, right? And we didn't have cell phones. I went to the locker room, called home, and my wife answered and immediately said, what's the matter? What's wrong? And I was like, I didn't even say anything. And she said she could just tell by my voice that something had gone wrong. And I told her what happened. And yeah, and then, I said, "Well, I'll be home in a couple hours."
Right.
Right. And
Famous
so
last words.
famous last words. So, I go down to the Hall of Justice. Homicide detail interviews me. 2 great homicide inspectors, and the DA investigator all questioned me, took photos of my injuries, took photos of my ripped pants and things like that. And I was feeling like, yeah, it, that's a no-brainer. It's shot or be shot, right? Shoot or shoot or be shot. And at that point, I wasn't worried at all. I was worried about my partner, how he was doing, and I wanted to get home and see my kids. And then, the after effect was, way longer lasting than the actual event itself.
Sure.
So, you can imagine, the second guessing yourself. What else could I have done? People asking you questions about it. Some people giving you that, stare like, like you're, you have a second head or something, like they don't know what to make of you. They don't know if to approach you or ask you questions. And some people coming up and just asking dumb questions.
Right.
And then, sleepless nights. And, as a Catholic, I questioned, you know, what I had
Morality
done.
of it.
Yeah. And so what I kept going back to was that, it really struck home that, if things had gone a little bit differently, my kids would be growing up without a dad.
Right.
And at that stage of their life, I had thought how awful that could be. And then you talk about Larry Blum. Months later, I went to a seminar for a week down in LA with Larry Blum.
Mhm.
And I bought his book and I really took to
Yeah.
heart everything he said. And he pretty much, validated all the things I thought and the chemical changes in your brain and all those things that happen. And then, oddly enough, we could talk about it another time, but oddly enough, he appeared as a witness in a case where a cop sued me when I was a commander. Cop sued
Wow.
me for being pulled off a street after what he called his 15th shooting on
Holy
the
shit.
job. And so you can imagine I had some questions and there was some real questionable actions in the shooting. And Larry Blum was there on the stand. And, I felt a little bit betrayed, but then I felt some delight in how our city attorney just carved him up with some of the things that he said with another psychologist. And we won the case, of course. I was, acquitted 12 zip and didn't keep the cop from quitting and then writing a book about it. And I'm happy to say that I'm in 3 chapters of his book
Wow.
with no residuals. And at one point he calls me the devil in the flesh. So I got that going for me.
You should have that like framed.
Yeah, I should.
You should have that framed. Yeah, Larry Blum. I went, like I said, I went to his I'm shot class, and then after, so when I got read my rights, at least I will say that because there's a generational gap between us. I was prepared for it. They told me in the academy. They said, "Hey, listen, we've done a bad job in the past of preparing cops for what the aftermath is from a shooting, and we've learned from that. And so now we're going to spend some time talking about what the aftermath will be if you get involved in an officer-involved shooting." Talked about having to take your gun because it's now evidence of a homicide. They talked about how supervisors are instructed to give you another one back immediately because they don't want you to feel emasculated or declawed or any of those things. Talked about that fact that you committed a homicide, whether it's justifiable or not. You committed a homicide. You're going to be read your rights, right? Like all these things. And then they also said, get a rep, get a lawyer, all those, so there was a lot more, I think, that guys like you going through it and then becoming administrators, becoming brass and saying, hey, this is what I went through. We need to do better. Right. And so I think those changes have been put in place because I was not caught off guard by being read my rights. It still was bone chilling. Like it's still the moment of like, holy shit. Like I feel like the moment I saw the guy's gun, I was like, here we go. It's time to, like, this is where the rubber meets the road. I was prepared for that. The moment I was read my rights was was more of that gave me a sicker feeling in my stomach than seeing a gun.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because it's so antithetical to what I am and, being a cop and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, we are, man, I could talk to you about this kind of stuff for hours and hope you'll come back and we can, when, especially when either Chuck or Matt or somebody can pick your brain, because these are the kinds of conversations and these are the kind of stories that we love to have, especially because we get a lot of, police officers who are on the job listening to us, but we also get, with our veteran interviews and stuff, we get a lot of veterans who are looking into getting into police work. We get our listeners, emailing us all the time saying, I'm going to I start the academy. We've got listeners that send us pictures of them graduating from the academy. And we've got guys that email us and just say, hey, you're my first listen when I get in my patrol car at dark 30, because I know, it's a comforting voice to listen to about while I drive around the city and look for, things that go bump in the night. So I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate you giving words of encouragement, because as much as I joke around about, people say, what's the first piece of advice you give somebody who wants to get into law enforcement? And the word I say is don't.
No.
But in all honesty, it's because I need to have, like, I can't, it's not that simple of a question. This is not a job. It's a calling, right? This is not something you do lightly. This is not, this is not a career path. This is an undertaking. This is something that will change your life forever, and in good ways and bad ways. And you need to have your eyes open and have the scales fall off and go into it fully aware and fully committed, and be prepared to bring the best of you and have it take some of you away, and be forever changed by it. But it not all bad, right? A lot of it's good, but you gotta go in with your eyes open. And so that's why, I jokingly say don't, because for most people, this isn't a job they could do. This is something that is the Marines say, the few, the proud, the Marines, right? But I think, police officers, there's less police officers than there are Marines, and so there's even fewer, and they should be prouder. Police officers are the defenders of the Constitution, not the military, because the military is not supposed to operate domestically. Police officers are the ones that are guarding your rights, because they're here on American soil defending you from people that would take them from you. So I appreciate you coming on, Jim. And I want to give, I know we talked about it, but I want to give you the chance to dedicate your episode officially to your favorite sergeant and Marine. So please do.
Yeah, Sergeant John McCauley. I found out later he wasn't really in that much longer than me. He was already a sergeant. Just ship-shape guy, did everything by the book, led all his new guys, and respected by everyone, veterans, new guys alike. And what a blow in the first 2 years of my career to see that happen. And then he wasn't immediately killed. We spent 2 days with him in the hospital, and they had this rotation of cops guarding his bedside. And, we sat there for a couple of shifts hoping for his recovery that never was to be. And what a terrific guy. Think about him a lot. I've got his etching of his name from the Police Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C. So, yeah, thanks for showing that.
Yeah. And, Sergeant John S. McCauley as SFPD, end of watch July 16th, 1982. Rest easy, brother. We've got it from here. Jim, thank you. We hope you'll come back. And if you're open to having a broken down old street cop on your show, I'm happy to oblige. We'll have you back when Chuck. I know he's going to be, when he listens to this episode. One of my co-hosts is going to be very bummed that he didn't get to speak to you, because he loves discussing this stuff as much as I do. But hopefully we've helped some people out there if they're working through something on their own, or if there's people that are getting into looking into getting into police work. We hope Jim's provided you some clarity and some direction on that. Where can people find you if they want to?
Like I said, they can find me on Instagram, policing_matters podcast. I just want to leave with a message saying, look, I had that incident. I think I came out whole on the other side, had a lot of support inside the department and out. And, I know there's a lot of people who don't really feel that law enforcement's what it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a whole generation out there that could lead us into another segment of good policing, great relationships with the community. I can't say how rewarding the career was for me and all the opportunities it afforded me to. And that's why I'm doing what I do today with the podcast, with teaching 4 classes at San Francisco State in criminal justice. And like you, whenever they call me and say, hey, I'm in the academy, or I just graduated, or will you come to my graduation? So gratifying.
Yes.
And I just want to say, best to all your listeners to stay safe and, be smart, make good decisions, and think about yourself and your family too.
Yes. And for the rest of you, and remember, you can, I'm going to read all Chuck's stuff because Chuck is usually the one who does all this stuff. But if you want to be a guest, contact us at booking.warstories@gmail.com. We are open to hearing stories from police officers, firefighters, veterans, ER doctors, nurses, medics, EMTs. If you deal with human suffering for a living, you probably share the same scars and battle wounds. Firefighters, cops put holes in people, firefighters put the wet stuff on the red stuff. EMTs hold your hand while you suffer, and seeing all this stuff, it changed you. So we like to talk about it. We like to give a forum. If you want to send us an email or send us your story and have us read it, you can reach us at mailbag.warstories@gmail.com. So you can always send us an email. And then if you want to join us for the locker room, where we have our live show and we talk about what's going on in the world through the lens of veterans and police officers and first responders, and you can reach us at lockerroommailbag@gmail.com. That is every Wednesday night at 8:30 Pacific time. Jim, thank you for coming on.
And Tom, my pleasure. And I hope to have you and Chuck on the show as well.
We are absolutely happy to do that, and I look forward to it. And until our next episode, come home with your shield or on it.